Hey everyone, it's Sevi. Though Diluc has always been one of the OG DPSs of Genshin, his new hot skin has brought some renewed interest in him. So I finally made an updated video guide that covers Diluc's talents and kit, gameplay tips, constellations, artifact builds, weapons, and team comps. Hopefully, by the end of it, you'll be well acquainted with the Batman of Teyvat and his flaming bird. Let's begin.
The legend of the Dark Knight hero. An interesting rumor.
Starting off with Diluc's kit, each of his talents work together to form a cohesive combo for his on-field Pyro DPS role. Let's go through them one by one. Diluc's normal attacks consist of a quick 4-hit sequence and will be woven in between his skill procs. Being a Claymore user, these normal attacks are considered blunt damage. This means a couple of things. They are better at breaking certain shields like those of Abyss mages, they're faster at breaking certain structures like ores, geoconstructs, and even Regisvine weak points, and they shatter frozen targets. Together with his normal attacks is his elemental skill. Diluc's skill contains up to 3 consecutive slashes, each one dealing progressively more damage. On the talent page, it says its cooldown is 10 seconds and the timer starts from the first slash. However, as long as you use the next slash within about 4 seconds of the previous one, the skill cooldown won't appear. This gives you time to weave in normal attacks in between his skill slashes, more of which I will dive into later on. Another important feature is that these slashes have no ICD. This is essential to Diluc's reaction damage because it means all of them can trigger a reaction even when used in quick succession. For example, in a vaporized team, Diluc can vaporize all 3 charges, which is a lot more damage than if they had no reactions. It's also why pairing him with teammates that can consistently apply Hydro or Cryo will be an effective reaction playstyle. While his normals and skill have straightforward mechanics, they're honestly one of the more satisfying gameplay styles in Genshin. Combining them to deal combos creates a sense of rhythm with using Diluc that isn't as common with other units. I should also note though that his skill has this property wherein it's considered a Claymore attack, which means it applies blunt damage first before applying Pyro. How does that affect him? Let's take a look at this clip. When Diluc uses his skill on a frozen enemy, you'd expect a melt reaction since it's a Pyro on Cryo attack. However, what happens instead is that Diluc's blunt attack shatters the frozen enemy, as you can see from this white physical number, which is the shatter damage. Then that's only when it applies Pyro, but because there's no Cryo anymore, it fails to produce a melt reaction. Hence, it's not as recommended to use Diluc on freeze teams as he can't maximize melt reactions with his skill. This is a bit unfortunate as it limits Diluc's team comp options, but he still has many vaporize and melt comps anyway. Next, Diluc's burst will release a phoenix that deals AoE pyro damage. It has 3 stages of damage. First, the initial cast damage. It's what you'll ideally try to create a vaporize or melt reaction from to maximize big reaction damage. Then it's followed by damage over time that's dealt in an area of effect. This also knocks or drags smaller enemies back, offering a sort of crowd controlling or grouping ability. However, this might create some situations wherein it pushes out enemies too far while you're trying to stay inside Bennett's or Diona's circle. If there's something to hit once the Phoenix has reached the end of its path, it will deal another large instance of AoE pyro damage. But aside from dealing damage, Diluc's burst also infuses his auto attacks with pyro damage, which lets him do full pyro damage with his entire kit. The pyro infusion lasts for 8 seconds, but Diluc's A4 passive extends that to 12 seconds, and this can be further extended by hit lag. Since Diluc's burst has a 12-second cooldown and only a 40 energy cost, it's very achievable to maximize that pyro infusion on every rotation. And thankfully, it doesn't expire when you switch him out, which allows for more rotational flexibility. Like with his skill, the burst slash is also considered as blunt damage, so any frozen enemies will instead get shattered first rather than melted. Taking a quick look at Diluc's combat passive, his A1 decreases his charge attack stamina cost and increases its duration. This will almost never be utilized though, since none of Diluc's optimal combos include his charged attacks. Then his A4 passive, as stated earlier, extends his burst's pyro infusion by 4 seconds, but also gives Diluc an additional 20% pyro damage bonus, helpful for increasing his kit's damage output. As for his talent priority, all of Diluc's talents are worthwhile to eventually level up to 9, or crown if you really like him, as they do their fair share of damage contribution. But for prioritizing, equally level up his skill and normal attacks first, then level up his burst. Diluc's skill and normal attack combos are the bread and butter of his kit and the key to playing him efficiently. Diluc has several optimized combos, some of which are a result of his constellations. While I'll only show you 2 since these are the most recommended and common combos, you can check out Keqing mains or Diluc mains for a more comprehensive list of his best combos. The first is his very fundamental N2E combo. You start with his burst, followed by 2 normal attacks, then his skill, then repeat the N2E combo. Note as well that with this combo, you're ideally teamed up with Xingqiu or Yelan so that his normal attacks keep triggering Hydro application on the enemies, which his skill will then vaporize. The next is a faster version of this combo. Instead of 2 normal attacks, you'll only insert 1 normal attack between skills. This N1E combo results in higher damage in a shorter amount of time. These combos will also maximize your team's buffs like Bennett and the Viridescent Venerer set effect. They allow for his skills to take advantage of such buffs or debuffs before they expire. Applying these combos is quite easy and results in his satisfying rhythmic melee gameplay.
Flames! Purge!
Now let's look at what his constellations add to his kit. C1 is a straightforward increase in damage against opponents with over 50% HP. It's not that huge, but it's a bump nonetheless when active. C2 allows Diluc to stack up to 30% attack and 15% attack speed upon taking damage. This is a good early constellation for Diluc that gives a bigger damage bump than his C1. His C2 will also get procced even if Diluc is shielded when he gets hit, making it a more convenient buff to activate. C3 is a level boost to his skill, which is simply more damage. C4 is actually a confusingly worded constellation since it requires you to wait for 2 seconds before using his skill again, not cast it within 2 seconds. There's a visual cue where his hand is in flames to indicate that the buff is ready. What this means is that if you want that damage buff, you'll have to prolong your normal attacks by adding in another hit. However, the sources I've found actually recommend against doing this, as it can create the issue of Diluc extending your rotation, which means that some buffs can expire and fail to benefit a part of your rotation, resulting in a team DPS loss. Still, it's doable if you want to, especially with Xingqiu or Yelan, since their Hydro attacks have a long enough duration, and it allows you to get the big damage per screenshot numbers on Diluc's skills. C5 adds 3 levels to his burst, yet another damage bump. And C6 is Diluc's best constellation in terms of the damage increase it gives, thanks to the combined damage bonus and further attack speed bonus that you get from casting Diluc's skill. However, the constellation also allows Diluc to execute his later normal attack hits, even while weaving a skill slash in between. This means Diluc can tap into the larger multipliers of his 3rd and 4th hit, which can give even bigger vapes. Take note though that while his skill won't interrupt the normal attack sequence, dashing or getting staggered will.
Every course of action has its risks. Be careful.
Now that we understand Diluc's base and full kit, let's move on to how to build him. Diluc's main stat priority is very straightforward. He wants an attack percent or EM sands, a pyro damage goblet, and a crit rate circlet that will help you achieve a 1:2 crit ratio. Then for Diluc's substats, aim for crit, attack percent, and EM. Try getting a few ER rolls too to further ensure burst uptime, but it's less of a worry since he only has a 40 energy burst cost. You might wonder whether an attack or EM sands is better, particularly since you run him on a reaction team. To answer that, it really depends on what you have. An EM Sands, not to mention one with good substats, can be harder to come by, and so an attack Sands is within easier reach. So in most cases, an attack Sands with good substats will be the best option. Still, there are scenarios wherein if you do have a good EM Sands, it's more recommended. This is if 1, it has way better substats than your attack Sands, 2, you can consistently supply Diluc with attack buffs like Bennett so that the EM bonus and attack buffs can be balanced for more optimal damage output, and 3, you're using a weapon that has a high base attack and gives a lot of attack percent. But Diluc also has teammate sources that can provide him with EM, like C6 Diona, Albedo, or Sucrose, which can also help balance the attack sands and attack buffs he gets. It's also possible to get a decent amount of EM from substats alone. Again, I'd really just recommend you to go with the best artifact quality that you have, or personally test between your choices, or if you're really that concerned about min-maxing, use the Genshin Optimizer app to analyze your best artifact build. Now let's move on to Diluc's best artifact sets. For early AR players, prioritize main stats over set bonuses. Your best attack Sands, Pyro or temporary attack Goblet, and Crit Circlet, regardless of set, will do. However, if you're looking for early set bonuses, 2-piece attack percent, 2-piece Berserker, or a 2-piece Instructor are good options if you manage to get good combo pieces. For late AR, if you really want to bring out the best in Diluc, the 4-piece Crimson Witch is practically tailor-made for him. Aside from the extra reaction damage, Diluc's kit can easily get the 4-piece effect stacks, giving him a total of 37.5% pyro damage bonus. Farming this set is a lot of pain and resin, but if you're a Diluc main, it can be worth it. If you're unable to get a full Crimson Witch set, you can settle for a 2-piece Crimson Witch paired with either a 2-piece attack percent or 2-piece Wanderer's Troop. In terms of accessibility, the 2-piece attack percent can be more convenient to get now that they're among Spiral Abyss rewards, and there are 4 different sets that carry this bonus. However, a 2-piece Wanderer's Troop can outdamage the attack percent sets on a Vaporized team if, again, the pieces have equal or better substats and Diluc is receiving plenty of attack buffs from Bennett, Noblesse, Thrilling Tales, and even Tenacity. Either way, they come out neck and neck, so simply use whichever has higher substat quality. Whereas the gap between 2-piece Crimson Witch combos and a full 4-piece Crimson Witch set is about 4 to 5 substats worth, which is quite significant. But if you really don't want to sink resin on the Crimson Witch domain, you can always just settle for very basic combos of 2-piece attack sets and 2-piece Wanderers.
Lay waste to the wicked!
Moving on to Diluc's weapon choices. First, the free-to-play options. Your automatic free option is the Prototype Archaic, which you can keep at R1. If you have the R5 Luxurious Sea Lord, then it's a close alternative to the Prototype Archaic. An F2P upgrade would be the Blackcliff Slasher from the Starglitter shop. It's a good crit stat stick, but due to its triggered effect, its full potential can only be maximized when fighting enemy mobs. However, it costs Starglitter, which can be better spent on Constellations or a new character, so spend at your own discretion. Then, the pullable Rain Slasher actually has good utility on Diluc in vape teams thanks to its EM and bonus damage on Hydro-affected enemies. With high refinements, it comes out as a solid upgrade to your free-to-play weapons. Another viable gacha option for Diluc is the Lithic Blade, but with his optimal team comps, you'll likely get only 1 or 2 stacks from its passive. Although locked behind the Battle Pass, the Serpent Spine is Diluc's best-in-slot 4-star weapon even just on R1. To maximize the passive, however, you'll either want a shielder to go with Diluc or be good at dodging in order to not lose stacks. The Serpent Spine also performs best when buffed by Bennett, whose healing will also counteract the increased damage Diluc will take. At R5, with the right buffs, the Serpent Spine is incredibly competitive with Diluc's 5-star choices. Then for the 5 stars, there's the Wolf's Gravestone and the Unforged. They're very close in power level, albeit with different conditions for maximizing their potential. Wolf's Gravestone's full attack buff only activates against enemies below 30% HP, while the Unforged requires you to have a shielder on and needs a few hits to get the full attack stacks. Anyway, if you have either of these weapons, then Diluc is all set, but one of them certainly matches his aesthetic way more than the other. A more recent contender for Diluc's 5-star weapons is the Redhorn Stone Thresher if you have it, but I wouldn't recommend you to pull it only for him. The crit damage stat is a very good damage bump, but only if Diluc can be consistently buffed by Bennett to make up for the weapon's low base attack. If your only 5-star Claymore is a Skyward Pride, it will at least be an upgrade over the free-to-play options, so the 4-star Serpent Spine or Rain Slasher can surpass it.
Let's take a moment to rest and plan our next move.
Finally, let's go through how to make Diluc's team comps. Being a Pyro DPS, Diluc's best teams consist of Hydro and Cryo units for Vaporize and Melt reactions. However, as of now, Hydro is the more go-to option since Xingqiu or Yelan themselves are good at consistently setting up Vaporize reactions. There are Melt teams for Diluc which involve Rosaria and or Kaya, but they can be more complicated to pull off. Diluc appreciates support units that can buff his stats, like Bennett for attack or C6 Diona for EM, and shielders for uninterrupted gameplay like Zhongli or Diona. Viridescent Venerer Animo units are also helpful, as they can buff while also shredding pyro resistance. But in Melt teams, they can infuse their abilities with Cryo to ensure that Cryo can apply fast enough for Diluc to melt. There are a lot of variations available, so I'll just discuss the standard team templates instead. The rotations for these teams will generally involve activating your support or sub-DPS abilities first before finally switching to Diluc last. First is a Vaporized team, which is standard for Diluc. Xingqiu and Yelan synergize with Diluc's combos as they'll apply Hydro with his normal attacks so his skills can consistently vaporize. Bennett is there to buff Diluc's attacks, and you can go with an Anemo unit to shred Pyro resistance or a Shielder for more survivability. Another rotation tip is specifically for when you're using him with Bennett while up against light enemies that get pushed by Diluc's burst. There are cases where you might actually want to use Diluc's burst first before using Bennett's burst. Otherwise, you might end up having to chase enemies outside of Bennett's circle if you push them too far, and thus end up wasting Bennett's buff and healing. A Vaporized team variation is a double Hydro comp instead to double your Hydro damage output with the 4th slot depending on your preference. Next, an Overvape team combines Overload and Vaporized reactions. Applying Hydro and Electro produces an Electrocharge reaction, and the Hydro and Electro auras appear simultaneously, which Diluc can then overload and vape with his abilities. Fischl and Beidou will be really good choices for the Electro slot. Then, Diluc's Melt team is harder to pull off than his simpler Vaporized comps. This is because Rosaria, Kaya, or Diona alone don't have the level of Hydro application Xingqiu or Yelan does. Hence, it's recommended to have at least 2 sources of Cryo application, which you can achieve by a double Cryo comp, 1 Cryo teammate plus Sucrose or Kazuha for Cryo Burst Infusion, or double Cryo plus Anemo. But as you'd expect, Cryo team rotations have more steps and nuances this way, so if you want to avoid the headache, I'll recommend his Vaporized comps for being already very strong and much simpler to execute. Lastly, this is an off-meta Diluc team, but if you get salty from farming the Crimson Witch domain because you're getting insanely good Lava Walker pieces instead, you can always try slapping on a full set and put Diluc on a mono Pyro team. But to make this as good as it can be, you should have Kazuha for his team-wide Pyro damage buff. And that's going to be all for this guide on Mondstadt's Wine and Grape Juice Mogul. Let me know in the comments if you're a longtime Diluc main or someone just discovering him recently. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, consider subscribing to my channel for more Genshin Impact guides and content, and I will see you all soon. Take care!
You have already proven your determination. Well then, it is now time for you to witness my resolve.